You see, I believe that the population explosion is having the biggest impact on the quality of life of ordinary folk than any other issue. It all started, of course, when the current Home Secretary became a Member of Parliament back in May '97. And it's worth reminding ourselves that net migration was the same during the late 1940s, the whole of the 1950s, the whole of the 1960s, the whole of the 1970s, the whole of the 1980s, and the 1990s up until Mr. Blair. Net migration had run at 30 to 50,000 a year for over half a century. Then Mr. Blair gets in and decides we're going to open the doors in a way that had never been done before, to the delight and joy of big companies and especially giant multinationals who have always wanted as much cheap labour as they can get, and to hell with the consequences for working class families and people. The financial rewards for smuggling people across the English Channel can now net a gang 2 to 3 million euros a week. Whatever prison sentences or penalties are put upon them, there will always be people volunteering to make millions of euros a week. We will only stop this if we start deporting people that come illegally. Then they won't pay the smugglers.
Nigel Farage recently stirred up quite a bit of conversation by suggesting a big change in how unauthorized entries into the country should be handled. He pointed out that smuggling people across the English Channel has become incredibly profitable, with traffickers making around 2 to 3 million euros each week. Even though there are serious legal risks involved, the huge potential earnings keep attracting people willing to take the chance. Farage's idea is pretty straightforward. Start deporting those who enter illegally right away. He believes that if people know they'll be sent back immediately, they'd think twice before paying traffickers. This, he argues, would not only cut down on the money these criminal operations are making, but also reduce the number of people trying to get in illegally. His suggestion has definitely sparked a heated debate, especially around the impact such a policy might have on human rights and international law. The issue has now become a major topic in political discussions, highlighting the tricky balance countries have to strike between keeping their borders secure and upholding their humanitarian values. Farage's proposal has brought these challenges to the forefront, pushing everyone to think about how best to address the complex realities of immigration.
When you talk about Muslims as hostile to British values,
no,
I've got to say, I don't really. Let me finish what I'm going to say. I don't really see I don't really see how you arrive at that conclusion. And secondly, trying to say to me, you know, actually, you guys are not really like these other guys. I mean, you and I have known each other a long time. Can you imagine how offensive that is to a British Muslim? Let me ask you to put yourself in the shoes of a British Muslim, and can you imagine how offensive that feels?
How many people from your community fail to speak English?
How many people?
From the West Indian community don't speak English.
We all speak English, but actually so do most Indian Muslims, so do pretty much all Pakistani Muslims in this country.
I can take you to streets in Oldham where virtually no one speaks English.
A lot of people are upset with Farage's comments, accusing him of trying to scare people and make the situation worse. They think his words might be adding to the fear and tension that already exist. But Farage isn't backing down. He's warning that if nothing is done, the UK might lose its unique identity as a British nation. He's worried that with more and more unauthorized immigrants coming in, the country could change in ways that make it feel less like the Britain people know.
We have a growing number of young people in this country who do not subscribe to British values, in fact, loathe much of what we stand for. So what do you do?
Who are we talking about there?
Oh, I think we see them on the streets of London every Saturday.
What do they look like? Oh, we're talking about...
What do they look like?
Are we talking about Muslims here?
We are. And I'm afraid I found some of the recent surveys saying that 46% of British Muslims support Hamas, support a terrorist organisation that is prescribed in this country. So we've been, you know, and what's interesting is that this Prime Minister is building up far more of that population than anybody before in history.
Well, this is very interesting, and we don't have that survey in front of us, but let's just unpick what you've just said. Are you sure you want to make the blanket accusation that you've just made that Muslims are somehow less patriotic than other British people, because those people on those demonstrations are British?
Did you watch the recent elections that took place up and down the country?
We don't know that, and we don't know they support Hamas. Would you like to revisit what you said at all?
Let's be clear. there is a growing population of people in this country, a lot of them very young, who have recently been voting for and electing candidates, right, up and down the country, in inner cities, who stand for a set of values that are completely, not only don't subscribe to our values, but in many cases are totally against our values.
Even though his views have sparked a lot of debate, Farage continues to push for what he thinks is necessary to protect the UK's future. His stance brings up important questions about how the country can keep its security and culture intact while dealing with immigration. Farage's warnings about the potential changes to British identity have made the conversation even more complex, showing that this issue isn't just about immigration rules, it's also about what it means to be British today.
The issue is you're talking about these things without actually coming up with the solutions for them. When you say things like, you know, you claim that Muslims living in the UK don't share British values, how would you...
No, I didn't say that. No, I'm sorry. No. I'm not having this. I am not saying Muslims living in the UK don't share British values.
You said a growing number of young people in this country who do not subscribe to British values, and you then went on to explain that, yes, they were 46...
Well, thank you.
Then you were talking about the British Muslims.
So hang on. I'm talking about a minority, but a growing minority, and predominantly very young people in the British Muslim community are turning their backs on all the values and the tolerances that we believe in.
So my question to you was about British values. What are you summing up as British values when you talk about this?
Well, I don't think excluding women from public life and debate is very British, do you? Very interesting. I mean, we saw Angela Rayner yesterday virtually begging her local Muslim community to vote for her. Not a single woman in the room. Look at the celebrations that we saw after the local election successes for Greens, Independents, etc. in the local elections. You'll find it very difficult to find a single woman there.
According to Farage, this isn't just about new buildings or different faces in the streets. It's about something much bigger. It's about a crisis of national identity that's shaking the very foundations of what it means to be British or English today. And this isn't just some abstract concern. Farage points to the low voter turnout as a sign that people are losing faith in the entire system. When citizens feel disconnected from their own identity and history, it's no wonder they start to feel like their voices don't matter. Farage sees this as a dangerous trend, a sign that the public is becoming increasingly disillusioned with politicians who seem out of touch with the real concerns of everyday people. He warns that this growing frustration is creating deep divisions in society, pushing communities apart at a time when the country needs unity more than ever. Farage believes these issues are not just the result of failed immigration policies. He sees them as symptoms of a political system that's completely out of step with the concerns of the people it's supposed to represent. He argues that Britain needs a major political overhaul, something that will address these issues head-on and restore a sense of national identity that respects the UK's rich history while also adapting to its changing demographics.
They tax cigarettes to the extent where they're now £35 a packet. So the criminal gangs now don't bother with cocaine. Forget that, cocaine's boring. Cigarettes are very exciting. And so they run the whole tobacco industry. Shops everywhere sell cigarettes under the counter. Hairdressers sell them, newsagents sell them. And you've now got gang warfare. There have been 97 firebombing arson attacks in Melbourne alone in the last 2 years. So if you take a legal activity and you effectively criminalise it, you hand it literally into the hands of the bad guys. I wonder whether the Labour Party have thought that through, or frankly thought anything through. I bet they haven't.
In a dramatic turn, Farage also takes aim at the Labour Party's proposed smoking ban. He paints a grim picture of what could happen if the government pushes ahead with this plan, drawing on the example of Australia to make his point. Farage describes how extreme taxation on cigarettes there has backfired spectacularly, driving the tobacco trade underground and handing control of it to criminal gangs. He warns that Britain could see the same thing happen if it follows Australia's lead, with tobacco becoming a black market commodity even more profitable than drugs like cocaine. According to Farage, this could lead to a surge in violence as gangs fight for control, turning once peaceful neighborhoods into battlegrounds. Farage's warning is stark. Unless something is done, Britain risks losing not just its cultural heritage, but its very sense of self. He believes that the government's passive, out-of-touch approach is making the situation worse, and that what's needed is strong, decisive action to reaffirm British sovereignty and security. Farage calls for policies that will protect the nation's boundaries and cultural values, preventing future conflicts and restoring a sense of order and unity.
If we absolutely need to, we can stop the riots in the short term, but
and here's the important thing. Do we want to deal with the symptom that we're seeing today or solve the problem? Dealing with the symptom will turn us into France, where these flare-ups, these racial tensions between the Muslim community and the French right flare up month after month, year after year, leaving big parts of Marseille and Paris effectively no-go zones. Is that what we want? Or do we want to actually solve the problem? And I believe we can solve the problem. We need to end mass immigration now, to send a message to people. We understand that a 10 million population increase has put massive pressure on people's lives. We need to deal with the young men, undocumented young males.
And when it comes to the recent unrest, Farage doesn't mince words. He criticizes the Prime Minister's response, accusing him of oversimplifying the issue by blaming it all on far-right groups. Farage argues that this is a symptom of a much deeper problem, a widespread feeling of fear, discomfort, and unease that's gripping the nation. He believes that these underlying issues need to be addressed, not just swept under the rug. Farage calls for a real, robust response from the government, one that goes beyond just condemning street violence and actually tackles the root causes of the unrest. He advocates for stronger law enforcement measures like enhanced stop-and-search tactics and tougher penalties for carrying weapons. But he also stresses the importance of doing this in a way that's fair and doesn't discriminate based on race.
So the Prime Minister tonight, reacting to what has happened over the course of the last 48 hours, his conclusion, very simple, it's all the far right. As if they're causing all of the problems. No, the far right are a reaction to fear, to discomfort, to unease that is out there shared by tens of millions of people. Let me be clear. I don't support street violence. I don't support thuggery in any way at all. But I'm worried, not just about the events in Southport, but about societal decline that is happening in our country. Law and order, folks, on our streets is breaking down. This Prime Minister hasn't got an earthly clue how to deal with it. We need to start getting tough. We need to use stop and search, regardless of the colour of the skin of anyone that gets stopped. We need tougher prison sentences for anybody carrying a knife. We need folks to get real. Because I tell you what, what you've seen on the streets of Hartlepool, of London, of Southport is nothing to what could happen over the course of the next few weeks. Let's have proper law and order. But Mr. Starmer, just to blame a few far-right thugs to say that's the root of our problems doesn't work.
The Prime Minister's recent statements on the unrest have drawn significant criticism, especially from Keir Starmer. By attributing the turmoil solely to far-right groups, the Prime Minister overlooks the deeper, more complex causes. The rise of far-right extremism isn't an isolated event. It's a response to a pervasive sense of fear and unease that many people across the country are experiencing. While it's essential to denounce street violence and aggressive acts, it's equally important to address the underlying causes rather than just treating the symptoms. The incidents in Southport, along with the general deterioration in societal norms and law enforcement, highlight serious issues that require comprehensive solutions, not superficial fixes.
I'm all for us having an Australian-style immigration system. You know, if brain surgeons and doctors and people who've got skills that we need want to come to Britain, they haven't got criminal records, they bring their own health insurance, I'm for Australian-style immigration.
Through the point system, you want.
Through a point system. But you can't have that as members of the European Union, where there's an open door, as I say, to 500 million people. And I think what's going to happen is people's frustration about lack of school places, about lack of housing, about the health service under massive pressure with an increasing population. I think in the end, what Mr Cameron has to do, if he's going to renegotiate our EU membership, the question of open borders has to be at the heart of it.
The Prime Minister appears disconnected from the realities faced by the public. Effective measures such as strengthened stop-and-search policies, harsher penalties for carrying weapons, and a balanced, unbiased approach to maintaining public order are desperately needed. Attributing widespread discontent solely to a fringe group of extremists is a mistake. If left unchecked, the issues plaguing areas like Hartlepool, London, and Southport could worsen. What's required is decisive action and genuine leadership to restore safety and stability to the nation. Please subscribe and stay updated on UK immigration issues. Don't miss our upcoming video for further insights and developments.